Well, the coronavirus continues to gather speed, and a lot of people's thinking or hoping that this would just be another SARS or bird flu, that it would just light up and fizzle out, so far hasn't proved to be the case. Now, will it still be with us by the end of the year? To be honest, I hope not, because I've got a trip to Japan booked in November. So, so I'm hoping that that doesn't go all pear-shaped. But this is having an effect on our government. Now, it's very likely, from what we have seen and from what a lot of economic experts are looking at, is that we have been due for some time to have another economic crash because of our absolute 100% capitalist system. We are boom, 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 and then whoosh, and then we just go like that. And that has been the pattern of our economics. We have boom and bust cycles, and we hope that the bust cycles last shorter, but that's not tending to be the case. The bust cycles are actually lasting longer and increasing. The last one was obviously the 2008 crash, and many economic experts have been predicting that there is another crash around the corner. Now, what a lot of experts are saying now is that because of, if you've looked at the markets recently, you'll notice that a lot of stuff has dropped dramatically. And this could be the beginning of a potential another economic crash. Now, this piled on Brexit and obviously with Johnson is quite interesting, because it very much appears that Johnson and Cummings wanted to have a lot of fistfights, not with the EU. That doesn't seem to have been their intention, but with the UK's institutions and government itself. So this comes from The Guardian, from Gabby Hinsliff. So the corona crisis means that Number 10 can no longer fight the battles it craves. When weather changes in politics, it changes fast. It's only a few weeks since Brexit was the biggest peacetime challenge in a generation, a task so huge many wondered if Boris Johnson could pull it off. But now it's no longer even the most pressing problem on his list. As of this week, the government is at war, not only with the coronavirus, but with some of its own civil servants, the BBC, swaths of businesses opposed to Brexit, and possibly soon the judiciary, depending on the outcome of a review led by the new General Attorney, Savila Braverman. All while trying to deliver a trade deal with Europe on a timetable that many in Brussels already thought was impossible. Get either the first or the last of those wrong, and the worst case scenario is a 2008 style economic crash, not to mention the potential loss of life in a pandemic. Get both of them wrong, and the consequences don't even bear thinking about. But that isn't all. In the spare time it no longer has, Johnson's government is trying to plan for reducing carbon emissions to net zero, arguably a big enough project to dominate a parliament all by itself in normal times, and one in which would be taking a chunk out of the GDP, even if anything else was going along swimmingly, while simultaneously closing the gap between the North and South that has built up over the decades. Thanks to Downing Street's kneecapping of the former Chancellor Sajid Javid, above it a budget supposed to encompass all this being rewritten at speed by his successor, Rishi Sunak, who might be the rising star but has been in government for only 2 years and is in a post for the first time in less than 3 weeks. The downsides of being led by people who will cross the road to pick up unnecessary fight should be obvious now, even to Downing Street's lords of creative destruction. But, just to spell it out, the government is hard enough as it is without starting fires for its own sake. Now those in the Johnson camp who scoffed at Theresa May for failing to get anything done beyond Brexit are about to find out that there are only so many fronts on which a government can fight. Just as the NHS or even a police service will have to make dramatic choices in a pandemic, concentrating on the most urgent priorities, something that will surely have to give in the government too. The first obvious casualty is Downing Street's hopes of getting a big, bold, and potential controversial economic reforms through, while it's still riding high from a general election victory. Next week's budget is expected to see radical ideas shelved in favour of measures to support the economy through a potential serious outbreak of the virus, and while the other, there, let me put my teeth back in. um, Next week's budget's the virus, while officially the line is that the government could just delay the big decisions till autumn. If Brexit talks are by then down to the wire, then public appetite for more economic shocks will be limited. If a pandemic that could last for months does end up choking off economic growth, however temporarily, the big question marks hover over the spending promises that helped bring Johnson to power. Where is the money going to come from? Second, environmentalists should be braced for growing opposition to the net zero target if an economic downturn follows. Many natural conservative supporters were never wholly convinced by the argument. If the economy falters under the combined weight of a Brexit plus up to a fifth of the workforce going down sick, then expect to hear arguments that Britain can't afford to hamstring itself any further at this time, and it's looking like that is getting louder. The target for decarbonising the economy by 2050 is hard to duck, given that it's enshrined in law and that the Conservative manifesto and some bold early decisions have been taken. But becoming a world leader in tackling the climate crisis isn't critical to Johnson's political project of keeping the red wall voters who have defected to the Tories happy, and that makes a potential vulnerability. Third, the way Brexit negotiators responded to what looks like the coming storm is critical. For the next few months, the EU leaders will have their hands full dealing with the coronavirus and its economic consequences, as well as what looks like a resurgence of the immigration crisis on its borders after Turkey announced that it can no longer absorb refugees fleeing from Syria. There is likely to have less time, patience, and political capital to spare for Britain's self-inflicted neurosis over Brexit. But the EU leaders may also be more anxious than they normally would be about the risks of an uncontrolled and disorderly exit, creating disruption across the continent. If the pandemic starts tipping some states into recession, the sane outcome would be a far stronger will on both sides of the channel to agree a deal. But that will have to take hitherto unseen reserves of maturity on both sides, plus a willingness to compromise rather than play to the gallery. And Johnson ain't going to compromise. Given all his language, any state of compromise would be seen as an act of betrayal by his voters. And things could be worse. Obviously, to see how much worse, check the footage of Donald Trump's televised meeting with the pharmaceutical companies, during which the president is patently led through some extraordinary basic questions about how vaccines work and how long clinical trials take. But for all our sakes, the Prime Minister's intervention on Tuesday needs to be a turning point. There can be no more unforeseen errors, no more personal vendettas, no more unnecessary brinkmanship, or starting fires for the sake of it. If Johnson's infant government is to get us through all this, it needs to grow up and grow up fast. I can't argue there. Johnson's is acting incredibly infantile. Johnson is not a leader. He really hasn't shown any capability to actually lead. Yeah, he can do a good speech, but ironically, he seems to be falling into the Corbyn way of things. Yeah, he can do a good speech, but when it comes to actual leadership of the party, that's another question. And the Conservative Party, with a weak leadership will see blood in the water. So, another question that I would like to ask you: could it be possible that Johnson will not survive his term in office? It's a very interesting question.